Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I'm your host, Joe Kuzma, and I am flanked today. My number two rolling in the sidecar is Brian Roach. Brian, what's going on, B?
How you doing, Joe? It's a beautiful day, 78 degrees or something ridiculous like that.
You know, it is. It's actually 75 here in Northeast Ohio. You're in Jersey. So, I mean, geez, what's going on here? It's February, you know? It's football weather. It's nicer than football weather.
Yeah, by far.
So, we're going to talk more about backup quarterback situation. We may or may not have enough time to talk about the draft class that's coming up for the 2017 NFL draft. Boy, that tongue tied me right there. I don't get it. But I got to put you on the spot because I'm not sure if you got to listen to the last episode, but me and Eric Herman, we got sidetracked with a Step Brothers quote about Randy Jackson signing a samurai sword. And we were talking about there was this little conversation that occurred on the Fan 93.7 out of Pittsburgh with Ron Cook, Andrew Filipponi. Ron Cook been doing radio shows, and he has his own like blog and articles. He's been doing it for years.
Yeah,
great guy, makes a lot of sense. I don't have to always agree with him. Nobody's ever going to agree with. I don't agree with you half the time, Brian. But he was talking about how he doesn't necessarily understand why grown adults go out and seek autographs and get autographs. And he was talking about jerseys. He's talking about wearing jerseys, putting a name on your back, and blah, blah, blah. And this all came down, I guess, with Jordan Spieth playing with golf and always getting mobbed by the same people who end up eBaying this stuff. But I don't know anybody who owns more merchandise, Steelers merchandise, signed, autographed, official, and has met players, personnel, and everybody in between than you, Brian. You have a literal, almost a museum that's over there in your home. What do you take on Ron's take as it is?
Well, there's part of me that does understand that it is outside the norm, but at the same time, and especially with, I think, certain teams like the Steelers, where the fan base feels more like they are part of the team than just the fans of the team. I know we've talked about this before. We constantly say, yeah, and when we do this, meaning the Steelers, knowing full well we have nothing to do with what the Steelers do, that we're not parts of the organization, but we feel that way. And especially for me anyway, having followed the Steelers since, I don't know, like 69, 70, my stuff is a way for me to maintain my memory base, so to speak, because every single piece I own has a story that goes along with it. You know, I've got a Steel Curtain signed mini helmet by all four members of the Steel Curtain. I've got images of the Steel Curtain. I got the bus running over Urlacher in a big, huge signed poster, mini helmets and full-size helmets and all that stuff. Really, it's a way to stay connected with the team. It's my happy place.
Well, memories is a good thing. I mean, I don't know how you feel about, and I know you had to get rid of, you had so much stuff. I think your wife was maybe threatening to move out, or maybe it was pushing her out the door because you had so much that you had sold some stuff. But I mean, your whole purpose for, because I was talking about the Chris Boswell jersey I got off of you, and I said I'm going to go on this, like maybe go on this whole trend of just getting kicker jerseys signed or something. It's something neat. It's memory. You could say, hey, I met this player. Maybe. I mean, I think it's more special even when you meet the guy and they personalize it or anything like that. And And somebody was asking me about, hey, we want to hear more about your wrestling stories and stuff, and this isn't the time or place, but I used to autograph things no matter how little of importance I was in the whole grand scheme of things, but kids don't know. I mean, it's mainly a lot of kids. I'd sign some things for some adults, or there's there's charity things we did with like mentally handicapped people and things of that nature, and it brightens their day no matter who you are. That's one thing. The other thing too, I think, and you say memories, it's like one thing I didn't like to do when I signed anything was it depended on what I signed. And the oddest thing I ever signed in my life was a stuffed frog. It was a stuffed animal, not a real frog that was from the taxidermist. But when people give you like paper plates and napkins because that's all they have, they see somebody at a diner. I mean, I think it's me and Eric were talking about selfies, and I think taking a selfie with somebody is much more important than having a paper plate. What are you going to do with a signed paper plate? I always thought that was kind of foolish. Doing the selfie thing, I mean, it's a lot more, what do you want to say, accessible nowadays because everyone has a smartphone that has a camera and it has all this storage. You don't have the old film rolls, and you know what I mean? You can't burn like one of your 20 pictures that you have for your film to get developed. Now you could just snap away, so you could have thousands of photos, and I think that's why it's a little more prolific. Eric had said something about D'Angelo Williams saying, hey, talking stories, this and that. One reason I've never felt great about approaching somebody and they're outside of, let's say, when I'm outside of work, I don't want to talk shop. You know what I mean? I don't want to talk about my job. So I always felt like that was really imposing on them. I mean, you may have some small talk, or that might be something you do when you go to one of these fan fests or something of that nature, if you have time, because there's usually a long line of people waiting. But other than that, that was just kind of like my part 2 of that whole autograph thing. I had to ask you what you thought of that because, like I said, I mean, I literally have 2 signed jerseys, and then I have a handful of different signed things from different wrestlers. I've had wrestlers sign autobiographies that they've written or had ghost written about themselves. I have a few like 8x10s, an action figure, like small things like that, and that was just more or less. I mean, I grew up and these guys were kind of like my heroes, and it's kind of neat to have it signed. I mean, I have things that aren't signed too, that I would, like a championship belt that I would love to have signed by an individual. In fact, HBK, who's gained some more fame in Pittsburgh because of the famous line over there with the Penguin substitutions in hockey, but you know what I mean? I'm not like bent out of shape either that I don't have that autographed. I could care one way or the other. I just don't. It's not something that, aside from the people that are going out there and purposefully doing it to try and make a buck, I don't have a problem with it. It doesn't bother me.
I completely agree, and I can tell you everything that I've got is, for the most part, was signed in person, but not where, as you said, where you would be interrupting somebody. Because, first of all, I don't generally wander around with a bunch of mini helmets in my trunk or wearing a full-size helmet. Even though some people might think that I do, I don't wander around wearing a full-size helmet, just hoping a Steeler will be around to sign it. Because I agree completely. I wouldn't interrupt somebody in their normal daily life. Now, I got an interesting story, though, to tell you. When I was at an Olive Garden here in Jersey, and I'm always dressed in Steelers gear. My wife will tell you that I own nothing else. I do own other clothes, but I don't wear them. So we're eating dinner, and a guy, very, very large individual, comes up, and he says, "Are you a Steelers fan?" And I said, "Of course I'm a Steelers fan. You can't tell?" And he said, "Yeah, I thought so." He said, "Here, look at this." And he pulls off his Super Bowl ring.
Oh, geez. And
it was Willie Colon.
Nice. Very nice, of course, because he's with the Jets.
Yeah. And I don't know who he was with at the time because I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't know who it was right away because, I would recognize Ramon Foster. There's some linemen I would recognize. Willie Colon was not one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
But he let me hold the ring. And it shook my hand, and that was great. It was cool. And this was even, before the prevalence of smartphones, because otherwise I would have gotten a selfie. So it's been a while, probably about 10 or 11, 12, maybe even 12 years ago. But that's different in the sense that he actually approached me because he saw I was a Steelers fan. I'm good with that, but I wouldn't interrupt guys running around doing their thing.
Yeah, that's what I was telling Eric too, and I've been around a lot of even low to mid to high range, big time celebrity pro wrestler types. The only one I bothered was Vince McMahon, which I told the story of. He walked into Gold's Gym and I couldn't just not get a picture. I pretty much avoided bothering anyone else. Like one of the guys that was just up and coming walked into like the Hard Rock Cafe that night after one of the events, and I kind of poked my wife. I said, "That's so-and-so over there." And I'm like, they're with their girlfriend or sister or family member or whatever it be the case. And I'm like, and they're waiting for a table just like everybody else. They're
right.
humans just like us. I'm like, I don't want to bother them because if I do, most of the people are here in this area for this big event. It was WrestleMania weekend. And he's going to get mobbed because I'm going to be the one that recognizes this guy. And it's kind of the same thing like you're saying, you wouldn't recognize some of these guys. Well, this is one of the lower guys. Wouldn't you know that somebody actually did end up recognizing him probably after we were waiting already 10 minutes and then the mob came and whoosh, and he couldn't it was almost like paparazzi like. So but I did have an actual football story that was much like the Vince McMahon one, except I did not get a picture with Dan Rooney. We had this was back before they've renovated everything at the Pro Football Hall of Fame and renamed it Tom Benson Stadium, and it was in progress. I don't know if this is the same setup now because I did not go last year, and they've been doing even more improvements this year. So we're down there for the weekend for the induction ceremony with Jerome Bettis. We're just walking in like we're just with the sheep. We're the herd. We're trying to find our seats, and there's like a general entrance with a big charter bus. And there's just a couple of people. There's actually really no security, believe it or not. There may have been like one or two people that just had their arms out wide, pretending they're flying or whatever, just to hold the crowd back. But everybody kind of formed a natural, almost parted like the sea, and was allowing all of these guys with gold jackets to walk. And I'm telling you, it was Dan Rooney, who looked like, Master Yoda, kind of doing his little hunched over slow walk. John Madden walked through. Chris Carter came in. I think Jerry Rice. We saw like I couldn't the names of the name. I mean, anyone who has a gold jacket is a name that you wouldn't forget. So that was a really cool story. Didn't nobody bother those guys. They respected their space enough to just allow them to walk right through. Took some pictures from afar. We got a few of them. My cousin got the fist bump Chris Carter, and from that point forward, they've probably renovated this. So hey, some freaky guy just tried to fist bump me or punch me maybe. He had his fist out at me. So we got to do something with this in security instead of just having it so lackadaisical. It could be because of the way they're renovating too. I really don't know, but it was neat to do that. So in saying that, we didn't see any quarterbacks, but we will talk about one that we feel is going to be in the Hall of Fame here in the future. Probably doesn't get the respect that he should, much to the fact that people are already trying to dig a hole that's about 6 feet deep. What do you say, about 7 feet long and maybe about 4 or 5 feet wide for Ben Roethlisberger, because they want to draft his successor. And they want to do it this year. And you and I both have agreed that this is probably not a good idea. This creates, and this really starts from a lot of people saying, well, the New England Patriots do this and the Patriots do that. And I had to point out the Patriots quarterbacks that they have brought up, like Brian Hoyer. Nobody even cared about Brian Hoyer. We picked him up off the street before he ended up bouncing around between the Browns and the Texans and the Bears. So he was a backup there. Matt Castle, they actually did get something out of Matt Castle, if I recall. They ended up trading him in the last year of his contract or whatever. They did get something out of Matt Castle. They first or second rounder or something. They got something big for him, and that turned out to be, I think through a series of trades, it turned out to be Patrick Chung. In the long run. So they got something out of that. They got a starting safety and a good one. Another guy is Ryan Mallett, who the Texans traded a conditional 7th rounder for. The Patriots still haven't even materialized that draft pick from 2 years ago into something, because they ended up bumping that around to the Seattle Seahawks last year, and now they got the Seahawks pick like a a 6th or a 7th or something like that. Obviously, they didn't like what they saw on their draft board and unloaded that, but they didn't really get anything for Ryan Mallett. Now everybody's talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, and I went over on one of the more recent, the Pet Peeves podcast that I did about all the picks the Steelers have made, and if you would have wanted Jimmy Garoppolo, I think that was the year that Stephon Tuitt went in the 2nd round for us. And it's like, would you have rather had Stephon Tuitt, or would you have rather had like a Ryan Shazier, or who are you willing to give up that we already had in order to have one of these other quarterbacks? And that's kind of the situation that we're looking at right now, because Ben Roethlisberger's 34, he's going to be 35, I think, in May. These guys are playing in their like their late 30s and 40s now. He still has a lot of time left, and he's still under contract through 2019.
Yep. And even more salient to the point, his successor isn't in this draft. This is not a draft chock full of hit quarterbacks. His successor's not here. So, even if Ben was on his last leg and was, fading into the sunset, which he's not. He's playing at an extremely high level. But even if he was, this is not the draft we're going to find his successor in.
Yeah, and a question, a lot of people think that just the Aaron Rodgers situation, that just grows on trees. A lot of people feel, the Dallas Cowboys even with like Dak Prescott, getting a mid-round quarterback, I beat this to death, and we're going to look at some of these guys. We may talk about them later or on another episode about these guys that are in the draft class. You'll see them on Gruden's quarterback camp or whatever that he has. And it's just, well, number one, okay, let's take a look at the Aaron Rodgers type situation. Aaron Rodgers was not meant to fall as far in the draft as he ended up falling. Green Bay just happened to take him. Favre was much later. Well, I think Favre was 38 when Rodgers was taken, maybe. So he was much older than Ben, so you're looking at about 3-4 years down the road by comparison. And then you look and see what happened. The situation got very ugly. Favre wasn't ready to leave the NFL. He wasn't ready to file retire papers, leave the Packers, and it was a very ugly situation, which just got recently patched up, I think just this year or maybe
last year,
because he got inducted for the Hall of Fame. It's almost very similar to how we shoved Troy Polamalu out. Do you really want to do that for somebody that we don't necessarily know whether or not Aaron Rodgers was going to be a good quarterback? You don't know that the guy you might take is going to be a good quarterback. And I think the Steelers have way more pressing needs than quarterback. It looks like you're going to have to take a guy 1 or maybe the 2nd round, because beyond that, I think all but maybe 6 guys, and one of those is Tom Brady, of course, were starters last year. Otherwise, they're all first and a couple 2nd round draft picks.
Yeah, let me say something real quick about Dak Prescott. Talk to me in 4 years about Dak Prescott. Don't talk to me now. There have been enough flash in the pan, one-hit wonders who flame brightly and then go away. Defenses are going to have a chance to adjust to Dak Prescott. Let's see if Dak Prescott can adjust to them. There's a reason he was in the 4th round or whatever round he was in. I'm not taking anything away from the kid. He had a great year. Do it repeatedly, and then we can talk. But after 1 year saying, oh, look, they found the greatest quarterback in the world in the 4th round, don't talk to me about that yet. Yeah,
and you know what? It's when people say, when you don't take a quarterback that's in the 1st round, which they say you could find one later. They did. Landry Jones was taken in the 4th round, but they're expecting Landry Jones to be a 1st round quality quarterback. It doesn't work that way. You can't expect to take a quarterback outside of the 1st round and have them play like a 1st rounder. There are exceptions, but there's far more exceptions than there is the rule.
Just think about it this way. Think about this. If every quarterback was a 1st round viable quarterback, then the entire 1st round would be all quarterbacks drafted, because every team needs quality quarterbacking. And for those few, I mean, you can probably count on 2 hands, certainly, maybe even 1, the number of true franchise quarterbacks that are in the league. So that leaves more teams that need quarterbacks than don't. So if all these quarterbacks were so good, they'd all go in the 1st round.
Yeah, you know what? A lot of people like to mention there are certain situations. I'm going to get into one. We're going to mention Peyton Manning because he's surrounded twice around quarterback situations the Steelers could find themselves in. But, I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks who failed that went in the first round. Just taking a guy because he's in the first round doesn't mean he's going to be great. E.J. Manuel is a good example. He's the only guy who went in that draft, and we're looking at this upcoming draft when we get into this part of the discussion. We're looking at that much the same way as maybe that draft that also had Geno Smith in the second round. A lot of people like to say, oh, well, you could get a guy later. Well, really the only guy that's out there like that, the only guy that's a third-round pick that is a starting quarterback right now is Russell Wilson. And I would argue that Russell Wilson maybe still isn't a great quarterback. He's athletic, he extends plays, he makes plays, but that team was long predicated, that offense leaned on Marshawn Lynch in a running game for a very long time, and Wilson does a lot with his legs as well. He wasn't necessarily attempting a lot of passes. He's not a guy that goes out there like a Phillip Rivers, for example, and throws 40, 50 passes in a game and 400-some yards. It's just not that style of quarterback, so it all depends on the system, too. Dak Prescott is a situation where a lot of teams got scared. They didn't want to take him because of the DUI situation. He fell into the fourth round. The Cowboys were also picking really early, and let's not make any mistake about this. They've worked on building that offensive line over the last few years, which the Steelers have as well, and then they take a stud quarterback because they had a miserably bad season because their franchise guy went down. He went down for the count, actually 2 years in a row, really, Romo being hurt for the majority of that, and now he's up in age. That's the reason they took this guy, but he was only meant to be the third-string quarterback. There's a variety of intangibles. There's a lot of variables that are involved in one of them is luck. And, I mean, it's just it's kind of luck that Dak Prescott got to where he was at this time. And make no mistake about it, he's a talented quarterback. He did not hurt his team. He certainly helped his team, but I'm just talking about how he got into the situation that he's in. There's a lot of luck involved in that. Him falling on draft day, the Cowboys picking where they are, Tony Romo getting hurt, Kellen Clemens getting hurt, and making the way for him to be able to play.
And don't forget having Zeke Elliott on the team as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, they won like 2 games the year before, 3 games or whatever, and got the 4th overall pick. And the guy's like, who didn't think he was going to be a stud? I mean, come on. There hasn't been that sure of a running back pick since, I'm not going to say Trent Richardson, but but he went high. But Adrian Peterson, I mean, there's not a whole lot of quarterbacks that go in, running backs that go in the first round at this point. And, and I had somebody on, I'm going to mention Bry Pete, who listens. It's one of the usernames that's on YouTube. I meant to give him a shout out a few times, so he's commenting. I think I finally convinced him that this isn't the year to take a quarterback. And it's because of situations like, I meant to say, Peyton Manning and not only Peyton Manning in Indianapolis getting hurt, the Colts being absolutely horrible, getting the top pick and being able to take Andrew Luck. And then that was a contract year for Peyton Manning, and they just said, no, we're not going to re-sign you. And that's kind of tough to do for a guy that did so much for that franchise. I couldn't imagine doing that to Ben Roethlisberger.
Absolutely. And remember, there was another quarterback in that draft.
There was. He was number 2.
Yeah. And how well did he do? So, when you talk about first-round busts, you can't leave Ryan Leaf out of the list. And that's a perfect example of the dangers of leaping for a quarterback.
I was thinking of another number 2, and that would be Peyton's successor, Andrew Luck, the second guy taken after him. The Redskins pretty much mortgaged the farm in order to get RG3, who wasn't even there. And then they took 2 quarterbacks in the same draft. Go figure that. So Kirk Cousins is another one of those guys. I think he's one of the mid-round guys as well that went a little later. But even Jimmy Garoppolo, like we said, was a second-round pick. Now, we found out some news, and there's still another Peyton Manning situation, by the way. But we found out some news, actually. Just recently, the Steelers are going to get another number 3 or third-round draft pick, number 105 overall by means of the compensatory system. They were actually in line for 2, but they only give out enough compensatory picks as there are NFL franchises. So only 32 of them go into the system. They get filtered by some secret formula. It's like the Colonel's recipe that isn't given out. Nobody knows really what it is, but it has to do with they lost Kelvin Beachum. They lost Antoine Blake, or what's his name? Is it Vincenzo or Valentino?
Valentino, yeah.
Valentino Blake. I'm looking at the tweet from Bob Labriola, by the way. So Valentino Blake, Will Johnson, Steve McClendon, and Sean Spence, and it all adds up to that, whatever the formula be. And he says that's a pretty good deal overall for the Steelers. Some other people saying it's a good deal for Kevin Colbert. And, as far as Valentino Blake goes, I said I would have traded in a empty pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes for Valentino Blake, let alone a third-round compensatory pick. But the way that ends up working out is the Steelers did get one of those picks. It's a very high one. Now you know what's going to happen. We're on the forefront of this news. All of the people out there are going to be like, they're going to use it on a quarterback now. I still don't think it's a great idea.
I agree. And that's I think almost the first tweet we saw, one of the first tweets we saw after we started hearing about the award was, does this mean they're going to take a quarterback? And my response would be, after looking at all these quarterbacks, no. No. If they take a quarterback in this draft, it better be after the 6th round.
Yeah, and you know what? Another part of that too, Brian, is that we're picking 30th overall. There we go. I'm saying we, as though we're in the front office, but it's number 30. It's number 30. You're not at number 1 or number 2, so you're already guys. When you do your fantasy football draft, and I know you only have like 10 teams in the league, you don't have 32 that are all picking alongside of you. When that pick comes around in the first round, and you're picking at the bottom at number 10, and 9, let's say, I know it's not the formula anymore, but let's just say 9 running backs go off your board. If you've done this before, do you take the 10th best running back, or do you take the best or the number 1 wide receiver because nobody else is taking a wide receiver? So there is some method to the madness. You're probably thinking to yourself, the other teams, well, if it comes back around, the other teams more than likely aren't going to take a running back. They're going to take a receiver, and then my guy's not going to be there. So there's so many things that play into this, but the one that I really want to bring up is, if you take a quarterback now, you're going to put yourself in a situation when Ben is approaching contract year. Well, they usually try and extend guys to 1 to 2 years out. I know Ben made this silly comment. He was frustrated. He was being dramatic about not playing. I think he's going to he's going to at least play his contract out. He could be here beyond then. But do you really want to be put into the Denver Broncos situation of when they win a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning? Peyton Manning has been a franchise guy. He's gotten you to the Super Bowl twice since he's been there in your city with your franchise. And now you have a guy that you took, 3rd round, 4th round, Brock Osweiler. Mm-hmm. He got a few starts because your franchise guy, was hurt. You got to see a little bit of him. He looked kind of good, but he also had some very good players around him. Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders and a good running game. And now people want to throw these giant $60 million contracts. You can't franchise tag them because you know what? You also took like a linebacker that was very good. We're talking about Von Miller. So
yeah.
You have to keep him under your thumb. So you're going to lose not 1 but 2 of your quarterbacks and be stuck with the guy you just happened to pick in the 7th round and took a flyer off of. I don't like the idea of losing Ben Roethlisberger in a Favre situation, or in this sort of, let's say Ben retires and then you can't keep the guy that you groomed behind him anyway.
Yeah, the thing is, and again, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before. We certainly have written about it. People don't understand how rookie contracts work. And when you draft somebody, you have 4 years that you can lock them up. I mean, especially if they're a first-round pick. If they're lower than that, some of those details change. But, you might be able to get them for the 5th year if you have a 5th year option on them, which you would in the first round. But that means that if Ben plays out his contract, whoever this guy is that we draft this year because we have to have a replacement for Ben is going to sit for 3 years and do nothing, and you have no idea what you've got. Now Ben retires. So now you got to throw this guy in there, and he's got 1 year to prove himself, so to speak, before you have to pony up. Well, guess what? If he's that good, he may get ponied up a lot of places, and now you're in a bidding war. It's just a mess. You can't operate that way. One of the things Bob Labriola says, which I love, is Ben's successor. He's last year he said Ben's successor is still in high school. Now, right now, I think Bob has kind of a bromance going with whoever USC's freshman quarterback is, because he's been talking about him a lot, and he thinks that's the guy.
You never, ever, ever know. And even looking at that case, I mean, the Steelers, you can have, and I'm currently working on a piece like this, and it'll probably be out maybe a few days after everyone hears this, but it's how long the Steelers took to find a franchise quarterback. Because, I mean, you had Neil O'Donnell, and then he left, and then you had, well, let me see, there was Mike Tomczak, there was Kent Graham, I want to say Jim Miller was somewhere in there, Cordell Stewart.
Tommy Gunn.
Tommy Maddox, and then you ended up at Ben Roethlisberger. And you know what? That was part of my discussion, too. The Steelers have drafted quarterbacks in late rounds. They took Dennis Dixon back in 2009, and I compared a lot of the numbers, and I will continue to compare some of those numbers with the different backup quarterbacks, such as Charlie Batch. I mean, literally, Landry Jones is like half of what Charlie Batch has done. A lot of people love Charlie. He was a hometown guy. No ill will towards him, and I've even heard out of his own mouth him say, hey, I'm not Ben Roethlisberger. I wasn't trying to be Ben Roethlisberger, and nobody is. You have to understand that a backup quarterback is drafted to be a backup. If you pick another guy and invest a high pick in them in order to be a successor, you almost have to be right. You can't be wrong at all. And, I'd much rather be wrong on a pick like a Jarvis Jones than have to worry about not having any quarterback at all. Should you take one like a Jared Goff, who has not proven anything yet, or we still don't even know what Paxton Lynch can be. But even if you take a guy at number 2, look at New England's they're frantic. They don't know what to do about this Jimmy G situation, because they want to get something for him before he leaves, because if they don't, then they're going to be in the same situation. They may not have Brady or Jimmy Garoppolo, and a lot of people are saying, well, they Jacoby Brissett. Well, Jacoby Brissett couldn't even score. He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass in the NFL. He hasn't thrown an interception in the NFL, and his offense that was run with a Super Bowl team this year couldn't score any points on the Buffalo Bills, where Le'Veon Bell single-handedly got more total yards than their whole offense did in a game later on the same year.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and that's the Garoppolo situation is a perfect example of why you don't draft a replacement too early. Because if it's too early and your starter is still your franchise quarterback, your future Hall of Fame quarterback is still playing at a high level, all of a sudden that is a wasted high level pick. And you can't afford to do that.
No, even if you are the New England Patriots, and a lot of people are going to say, well, that's silly because they're in the Super Bowl, and yeah, Garoppolo led them to like 2 victories, but you know what? They play in a chump division. I mean, we do sometimes too. I mean, we have the Browns, but imagine instead of playing the Browns twice, you end up playing them, I wanted to say 6 times. Yeah, that's accurate.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the Jets have not had a good quarterback in ever. I mean, they did okay with Mark Sanchez. That's because they had a good defense. The Bills have not had a good quarterback in forever, and we still don't know if Ryan Tannehill is a good quarterback, and he's been the only halfway decent one that the Miami Dolphins have had in a long time. So a lot of that has contributed to the New England success. But if one of those other teams happens to step up and they no longer have their Hall of Fame quarterback or their plan B, you know what? They're kind of SOL. They might be back in the dark ages, back when they wore those hideous jerseys, red jerseys with the white helmets. So they had some really bad years there, and I think that's it's almost sometimes you have to have we haven't lost since 2003, and that was back with Tommy Maddox as a quarterback. It might take another one of those years in order to get a nice level. That's how we got Ben, really. I mean, they still traded up, but we still had a high enough pick. You had to have a year where you didn't make the postseason, didn't do too well, in order to even have an attempt or a shot, or you have to give everything away, which we found out it's going to be real expensive, and which you talk about in your day one of the Draft Insanity that people can check out on SteelCityUnderground.com.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, think about it again. You mentioned Washington. They gave up the farm for Cleveland Browns to have a quarterback.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, and they've all done it. The Rams did it. The Redskins did it. The Eagles have done it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and I've talked about what all they give up on one of these other episodes. So not to beat that to death, we do have a draft that's going to be coming up here soon within like the next month and a half or so, Brian. So going to have you back on. We're going to talk about some of these prospects just to set people straight, because most of the guys that might actually be anywhere near decent looking at, they won't be available even in the third round where we have this extra pick. So thanks again for coming on.
It was always a pleasure, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And folks, you know what? I'm glad some of you are turning around. At least Bri Pete is. So if you agree or disagree, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead, shoot us a text, leave us a message over on the Steel City Underground Hotline. That's 203-900-4SCU. Until next time, be safe, be good, and I'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.